Welcome to Swords Against Madness, a gonzo, psychedelic, solo RPG experiment. Here I will follow in the footsteps of some of the finest fantasy RPG podcasts, but with a twist. This isn't your run-of-the-mill dark fantasy. I'm going for the strange and surreal that you'd get from 70s sci-fi fantasy. And to do it, I will be playing Swords and Wizardry, an extremely old-school game based on the original 1974 through 78 rules of the world's first fantasy tabletop role-playing game. Strap on your three-bladed sword. Get comfortable in your studded leather kirtle or your chainmail bikini. Fire up the wizard van. It's time to get strange. Oh, and it bears mentioning, the dice get to decide what happens. There's no cheating, no changing the rules, no fudging. No character gets special treatment when their numbers are up. And while I'll sometimes depict battle and throw in a little innuendo, I'm going to try and keep it PG-13. Or at least what passed for PG-13 in the 1980s. Listener discretion is advised. The powerful crash resounded through the water, waking the woman, causing her to sit up and splutter and cough. Salt water burning in her lungs and ripping through her sinuses. Her ornate green and blue silk gown clung to her, pulling her under, tangling her limbs. For a moment, in the confusion, she considered just stopping fighting. And then another crash woke her, startling her to consciousness and forcing her to begin to fight against the waves all around her. She pulled herself up onto a jagged metal ledge. Something artificial, something constructed. It was familiar to her, but she couldn't quite place it. Whatever it was blazing hot. It nearly blistered her hands as she pulled herself out of the water, but better that than drowning. Who was she? How did she get here? She couldn't quite place it all, at least not at first. She sat on the hot metal object, a massive red disc sticking out of the water, and tried to sort it all out as the heat from the device below her turned the water that had soaked into her clothing into steam all around her. And then finally she began to remember. This object she was on, it was a ship. Her ship, she was sure of that. There was a feeling of deep despair as she watched it sink beneath the waves. Yes, she had plummeted, crashed. She didn't know this planet. She had been sailing among the stars, until recently. And now, her livelihood was sinking beneath the waves. The Imperial's coin, that had been what it was called. And then her name began to come to her, too. Miria. That was her name. And she'd been on the run from someone or something. But now it would appear that didn't matter much. Whoever it was probably had caught up to her. Perhaps soon she'd remember exactly what she was running from. The whys and hows didn't matter. Right now, she had a lot of survival problems ahead of her. And she racked her brain trying to figure out exactly how she was going to tackle them. Well, let's say hello to Miria, my first player character. I have a few ideas of how I wanted her to start. A stranger in a strange land. Someone not from this world. But other than that, I don't know anything about her. And that's something I'm going to let the dice decide right now. Let's roll her up. Strength 9. Intelligence 12. Wisdom 9. Dexterity 10. Constitution 10. And Charisma 10. On the scale of human ability, Miria seems pretty average. She has a good mind, She's a little weak in the arm, and she probably doesn't always make the best decisions. That'll make her a perfect magic user. I've rolled that she has 1 hit point. This could be a very short story if I don't introduce other player characters soon. And I've rolled that she starts with 100 gold, or normally she would. Right now, I'm just going to start her with the clothes on her back, and because she's a magic user, we'll give her some way of accessing her spellbook from the beginning. Other than that, we'll let her come across gear about appropriate to that amount over the first little while. According to her intelligence score, she can know as few as 3 and as many as 6 spells of first level, and has a 55% chance of knowing any one of them that I choose to try. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll based on the ones I would most like to have if I were just a player, and see what happens. This can be a bit of tedious rolling, so I'll do it off mic to keep things moving along. Alright, I'm back. She lucked out and basically got everything that I was hoping she would. She starts off with a spellbook that includes Sleep, Charm Person, Magic Missile, Read Magic, Light, and a spell that isn't in Swords and Wizardry, but I can grab from any other OSR manual in my vast collection, Floating Disc. Alright, Miria, let's see how you get yourself out of this one. An hour later, most of it had finally come back to her. She remembered something of who she was. A free trader with her own independent starship. One with a certain disregard for things like tariffs and trade laws. And one who knew how to make enemies. Which of them had shot her down, she wasn't quite sure. She had a list. She toyed listlessly with the bracer around her left wrist, touching it, causing various glowing runes to appear and disappear in different configurations. This was her last real piece of high-tech equipment, a wearable computer that contained all the arcane knowledge she had managed to gain by dealing with warp dealers over the years, as well as all those tools a smuggler could possibly need. And based on what they were telling her, or more to the point, what they weren't telling her, Miria was pretty sure she had ended up on a neo-barbarian planet. That narrowed down who shot her down at least a little bit. It also gave her hope. If she was in orbit around a populated planet, there was some trade going on. And that also meant that somewhere on this rock, there was a way back up into space. What she would do when she got there, she had no idea. The Imperial's coin was slowly sinking deeper beneath the waves over time, and with it every credit she owned, not to mention thousands in cargo that she was going to be liable for if she ever got back into space. And of course, the radiation and heat leaking off of the ship was an ecological disaster in process. If this really is a sanctuary planet like she suspected, well, she might as well get comfortable.
Let's face it, Miria baby, we're hooped.
There was land not far away. It was almost painful to look up at it as she did once in a while, just far enough that she couldn't swim it. And given that there were squid-like cephalopods that were bigger than she was circling the ship, she wasn't sure she wanted to try. As Miria watched the creatures, one particularly large, silvery squid thing rose to the edge of the water and stared at her with one of its great tri-lobed eyes. For a moment she could swear she felt that tingle you get when a psychic being is trying to communicate with you. But if it was, its thoughts were too primitive for her to fully understand it. Maybe she was just imagining it. That's often a problem with psychic powers. But it almost felt like the thing was asking to be fed.
I hope to the void you don't mean me.
As an experiment, Miria took some time to visualize the green triangle on the corner of all the protein bars she was transporting, trying to project it to the squid. She also found herself feeling incredibly stupid staring at it, but after a moment it dove deep down. A little while later, several boxes popped up. One, then another, all of them protein bar boxes. Then she could make out the soft, gelatinous shape of the creature below as it pushed the boxes to the spot where the ship was only a few feet underwater. She peeled herself off the deck, taking note of just how bad those burns were getting on the back of her legs, and then waded down to the boxes, keeping a careful eye on the creature, ready to hit it as hard as she could with the last ounces of warp she still had stored in her. But it backed away, understanding that she wanted space, and so she pulled the boxes ashore, then pulled out a wrapped protein cube and tossed it to the creature. She was glad for the company, even slimy, tentacled company with bizarre psychic powers, and made a game of tossing it protein cubes in return for it bobbing down to bring junk up to her. By the time she decided to call it Squid. By the time the Squid grew tired of her little game, it had brought up a fairly interesting assortment of odds and ends. A pair of gloves resistant to heat and corrosion from her engine room. A spacesuit with more holes in it than whole cloth. A bullhorn she hadn't even been aware was on the ship. And, much to her relief, her jewelry box. There wasn't much in it these days. She'd hawked most of its contents ages ago. But it still had her family signet ring in it, and a hunk of dusty quartz that might be worth something. She examined the breathing apparatus in her spacesuit. It could be converted to a scuba tank. With a little work, maybe if she could convince it to get her a few more things. Something about that thought caused the creature to give alarm, and it made aggressive gestures towards her.
Okay, no swimming, I got it.
And then, just like that, it dove beneath the waves, and was gone. She closed her eyes and tried to call it back with her thoughts. To no avail. Obviously it was done with her game. But she was still desperately looking for signs of it, over an hour later, when the sound of oars in the surf and a distant calling voice caught her attention. One of the big reasons I'm doing this podcast is that I'm a huge fan of other solo RPG podcasts like Tale of the Manticore, Legend of the Bones, The Iron Realm, and The Lone Adventurer. I couldn't help myself as a guy who's just got into editing podcasts for a living, from trying to create something like them for myself, and it's not the first time. I ran a fairly extensive solo campaign off of my OSR gaming blog, Welcome to the Death Trap. I'd even considered doing a sequel to it. But I'm not the only fan of those podcasts in the house. My 8-year-old son is absolutely crazy for listening to people play D&D. He even asks me sometimes to play Dungeon Crawl Classics or Basic Fantasy solo, just so he can listen to me as I process the events. And more than once I've caught him sneaking down out of his bedroom to listen to Tale of the Manticore, while I've been listening to it while washing dishes. Ever since I started my own podcasts, he's been begging me to start a solo RPG project like this. To some degree, this is a present to him. He's the one who managed to talk me out of doing something with death in space, or the islands of purple-haunted putrescence, and go back to swords and wizardry for another round, in a whole new world that I would create on the fly using tools like Mythic GM Emulator. Of course, sometimes when he sees I'm having fun solo gaming, he desperately wants in and begs to have a character included. Sometimes those characters are even weirder than what I was envisioning doing in this series. While I was running my second session and entertaining him, he suddenly jumped in and started becoming an impromptu GM. He added in his favorite animal, the giant squid, a psychic one that could talk to the player character. And then he decided that he wanted to make sure that Miria had some items. So after I made him go through the rigmarole of making NPC reaction rolls and actually interacting with her, I, as Miria, managed to strike a bargain. Easy food in return for some salvage. At which point my son simply rushed over to the shelf, grabbed Index Card RPG, and rolled several times on the shabby loot table, giving me a very weird assortment of items that seem apropos to the campaign. In the end, it was just too weird and too fun not to include. For the most part, though, this is going to remain a solo project. Hopefully following a pattern similar to those podcasts I just mentioned. When he's responsible for the weirdness, though, I'll be sure to give him credit. Hello, I'm your anchorman Toby Dampt, here to tell you about Transreal News. What's this? You need to tell them about Transreal News? Clee, I'm in the middle of something here.
I think it's a wonderful idea, explaining exactly what we do here, Toby.
Thank you, Walter, but I'm trying to do this live. Oh, that's simply marvelous, Toby. That gives me an opportunity to steal the screen from you. Clee, shouldn't you be working on your advisories? We do have a broadcast to do in just a few minutes.
Well, doesn't that make the timing a little difficult on your part, Toby?
Well, it wouldn't be if I didn't keep getting interrupted. I just want to tell people about Transreal News.
Ha! Foolish primitive! I can tell you exactly what Transreal News is. It's a show where a bunch of shills and liars create a podcast trying to tell people what's going on ever since reality broke down and time and space became distorted.
Shills? Liars? I resemble that remark, darling.
I will run you through, Maxwell.
Promises, promises, Torg. Listen, guys, this is important. We tell people about rampaging time barbarians.
We will conquer.
Lockdowns in hell. The televistic slime that's slowly eating the noosphere. Sure, we have to run ads and look out for what the authorities tell us to say and not to say, but that doesn't mean we're not valid journalists.
Here, Toby. Somebody's got to warn them about the strange reality storms coming in, or the rampaging monsters across Australia, or
the ultra-violent time barbarians trying to murder their own ancestors to make themselves stronger.
Do not speak of which you don't understand, fool. That's enough, guys. For crying out loud, I'm trying to look professional here.
Sorry, Toby.
Tune into Transreal News for the most important news, advisories, and forecasts for people traveling the astral plane and beyond. Anywhere where you get your finest podcasts. Miria's heart jumped when she saw two people in a rowboat coming towards her. She had been so intent in her reverie, so focused on trying to communicate with the squid, she hadn't even been paying attention to the horizon. The figures in the boat were a man and a woman. Humans, she was relieved to see. The man was short, skinny. He had a generally underfed look about him. Watery eyes and a weak chin, but long, clever fingers. And he steered the boat with practiced precision. The woman next to him was barely more than a girl. Her blonde, frizzy hair was tied back in a ponytail, and while she was athletic, she gave off the impression that she wasn't quite comfortable in her own skin, and had wide, staring blue eyes that gave a bewildered impression, like she disbelieved everything she saw. "Hello," said the young man. "Are you hurt?"
Hello. Thank the void, I thought I was in real trouble here. My name's Miria, and this is my ship. I appear to be stranded out here.
"Did you say ship?" the young man called. "As in, a ship of the sky? We saw you fall."
And thank the void again. You seem to know what a starship is. This is a really good sign. Tell me, do you get many travelers here?
"No, not many, and not for a very long time. In fact, you're the first star traveler we have seen in 10 lifetimes or more." There was a brief exchange inside the boat. The young woman nudged the man. She gave him a meaningful look and made a few complicated gestures to him. "Have you come to help us wake up the all-knowing?"
I'm sorry, I don't know what that is, but if you help me out, I would be happy to help any way I can.
"Listen, we'll be happy to help you get back to the mainland, one way or the other. But we were told one day a traveler would come down from the stars and help us in our time of need, and our village is in desperate need. We were told that she would have sacred words to give us, and we've been waiting a long time to hear them. Do you know what I'm talking about?" Miria groaned. There it was. Somebody had been manipulating their religion, probably not in a long time, and that would make it even more difficult. She'd spent a few years traveling with creatures who did this as a way to create safe harbors for themselves in times of need. She generally saw it as a sick and wrong practice, but right now, who was she to argue with the opportunity to get off the sinking ship and get out of the radiation? She racked her brain with common holy words that some of these sorts used. And after a moment, she took a deep breath.
Is it, by any chance, Ba Weep Grana Weep Ninny Bong?
The young man looked visibly relieved. He let out a sigh and a quick prayer to whatever deity he followed. They rowed the boat in close, to where the water just barely covered the metal hull of the ship. Thank the gods you finally have come, and truly on the eve of our destruction. Thank you so much. I'm Olan, and my cousin here is Rhea. We were sent to check to see if anyone survived the falling of the sky vessel, and take them back to our village elders. Please, climb aboard. We're happy to help. There was something about hope that changed Miria's awareness of her body. The blisters and burns on her hands and legs began to throb. Once she was in the rowboat, she began to feel weak and tired. She said little during the journey, taking time just to assess what few facts her muddled head could get around. This culture had been meddled with by the Tracy Syndicate. The Tracy's often engineered religions in order to get people to create artifacts that were worth something on the black market. They could also extract psychic power from the worship and the veneration that people cast in their direction. They were dangerous, selfish, opportunistic creatures, and she had never met one that didn't cheat at cards. No matter what they were doing, the Tracy always stacked the deck in their favor. The rowing took well over an hour. As they rounded a rocky cape, she got her first look at the home village of Olan and Rhea. Many of the buildings were burnt out husks, and in places wisps of smoke were still rising from it. It had an air of deprivation and despair about it. Well, everywhere except the gilded temple at its heart, which stood tall, proud, and polished over its neighbors.
Please tell me my ship didn't do this.
Rhea looked surprised, and spoke to her for the first time.
No, your ship didn't do this. The Garum did. Why? Is your ship capable of such devastation? Things tend to catch fire as they fall from the sky, and sometimes things fall off at incredible speeds. Just one deck plate from my ship could have leveled half this town, if it had fallen wrong.
Rhea seemed strangely disappointed by the answer. Olan, on the other hand, seemed happy about that result. Well, we'll take it as a sign then. Maybe you really are meant to come and help us. By the time they pulled the rowboat aground and helped Miria out, she had become so tired and worn from her journey that she all but collapsed into the water. She didn't remember much after that, although she's sure she introduced herself, and heard Olan exclaiming that she had spoken the words. Eventually they helped her into a shambles of a guest hut, where she tumbled onto a mattress of sweet-smelling woven grasses, and slept for 3 days. You know, I've played a lot of solo games using Mythic GM Emulator. I review and rate a lot of games and break down their mechanics. I talk a lot about them on my blog. And not once has Mythic GM Emulator ever given me an extended break. It loves to throw an endless series of curveballs at me, and I like it that way. I love chaos in my games. The more randomness you can add that takes away the guesswork from being a GM, the better off you are. Things like NPC reaction rolls and morale checks, they make a big difference to the way the game plays. I was half expecting her to be dragged off to a hut and taken prisoner. But instead, the dice at every turn were surprisingly kind to me, more so than I'm used to, and it's made me pretty suspicious. I used a standard issue NPC reaction roll to try and figure out how they would respond to Miria. And what I discovered was that they were already positively disposed to her. I decided to ask Mythic why that was, and I got the answer that they were expecting her to unlock a mystery. And when I asked whether or not she had a Dune-esque prophecy about her, I got an extreme yes. So now she's the potential hero of the village, but she needs to give them a sign in order for them to be comfortable with her. I made it pretty unlikely that she would have a sense of what the sign would be, but lo and behold, she knew it. This told me a lot about the universe around her, and gave me a pretty good idea of what kind of person and what kind of company Miria has kept in the past. I then decided to determine how badly they wanted this all-knowing to be woken up. To figure out how important it really was, I rolled a d8 plus 3 to get a scale of 1 to 10 how important it was, with an 11 being that if they don't get her to help, they're all dead. I got an 8. After a little more playing with the oracle, I determined that the town desperately needed this all-knowing to help them solve a problem, one that was bringing their town to ruin, starvation, and misery. When I asked who or what they were up against, I got the answer extravagance and art. I don't know why, but this immediately got me thinking of a few of my favorite L. Sprague de Camp Conan novels, where often the bad guys were priests who lived in absolute luxury off of the backs of the laborers, and those who opposed them were brutalized. So, as I was describing the village, I got the idea of a temple, something extravagant and beautiful, sitting in the middle of a ruined village, where the people are starving, but the priests have grown fat and powerful. This is a fairly improv-heavy exercise for me. I don't write a script after I play. I roll a few dice and make a few notes to interpret the scene, and then I go straight to the microphone and spill it out here. Sometimes that means that things spontaneously come to mind, like the idea of the Gorum, whoever they are, being the cause of the problem. Are they servants of the priests? Probably. But how about I let the dice tell me that? Master, please, it's important. The ragged villager staggered into the underground chamber, still thrashing as if the guard's hands were still upon him. He prostrated himself, closed his eyes so that he wouldn't be tempted to look at the beauty of the master's consorts. Master, somebody survived the fall of the great disk from the sky. Be at ease, my child. Rise. Open your eyes and speak to me. The acolyte forced himself to sit up, to open his eyes and gaze upon his master, to try not to look at the other things around him. The master was tall, handsome. His elegant silken robes of red, decorated with elaborate ornaments of gold. He held in his hand his holy object, a hollow crystal sphere in which something strange squirmed and slithered. His face had a smile as cold as the void. Master, as I said, there was a survivor, a woman, and she's spoken the words. And where is she now, my son? She's comatose. She was badly injured. She's staying at one of the guest huts in the village. Then the time has come to make many preparations. Go and bring me a worthy sacrifice, that I might awake the Gorum again. She must not be allowed to live to wake the All-Knowing. I will do as you say, Master. Do not fear, my child. She is nothing but a false prophet. She will not give good answers, but I suspect she shan't live long enough to spread her lies. Thank you so much for listening to Swords Against Madness. It has been written, directed, and performed by Brian C. Rideout, and produced by Stormhead Productions. For show notes, character stats, spells, monsters, and other game content. Visit us at swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca. This episode included sound effects and music from Pixabay, as well as songs generated by Brian C. Rideout using Suno AI. If you want to find me on social media, find me on X at Stormhead Audio, or visit the Stormhead Productions site on Facebook. And until next time, roll hard, think weird, and party like it's 1974.